13th May 2012, the Etihad Stadium. One of the most famous lines was screamed by Martin Tyler on air. And the Premier League changed forever. Let's take a stroll down the memory lane and look at one of the most famous goals in the history of Premier League that changed the whole landscape of football. This is 93-20. Consider subscribing to our channel. It's free and helps us a ton. Thanks. But before we do that, it is essential to understand the full historical context. Premier League, established in 1992, changed the landscape of English football forever. While money and investment were always an important part of a football club's success, the creation of Premier League made money more important than ever. It opened the tap of unprecedented amount of money, specifically from the broadcaster when they signed a lucrative deal with Sky, and the biggest beneficiaries of this shift were the clubs that were historically successful in the league. Now, the creation of Premier League and the ramifications of it are topics for different time, but it suffices to say that it brought a paradigm shift in how success was achieved on the field. When the dust settled, the club that came out on top was Manchester United. Other clubs did try spending their way to success, like Blackburn Rovers, Newcastle United and Leeds United, but Manchester United emerged as the most successful club of the Premier League era. By 2003, they had already won the Premier League 8 times. Only Blackburn Rovers and Arsenal being the other two clubs to win the titles during this period, and Newcastle briefly challenging them. 2003 saw another big shift when Abramovich bought Chelsea and started investing extravagantly in top-class players. Now, it wasn't unprecedented for an owner to try and spend their way to success, as we talked about before. Blackburn Rovers owner Jack Walker tried it, which brought them the 1994-95 Premier League title. Newcastle United tried it when they brought in Alan Shearer for then world record fee of £15 million in 1996, and Leeds United, who invested heavily into their team in the late 90s and early 2000s. However, none of these teams could sustain that level of investment in their squad once the results started plummeting. Leeds United was especially in trouble where the financial mismanagement was so severe that once they stopped qualifying for Europe, it caused such a financial meltdown that it led them to drop 2 levels all the way to Football League 1, and in 2006-07 season, they voluntarily entered administration. To this day, a financial mismanagement of such proportions is called doing a Leeds. But Chelsea was different. Abramovich had deep pockets, which meant Chelsea were in a much better position to invest in their squad and challenge for the title. And challenge they did. Since Chelsea's takeover, they regularly won the title. This established the top 4 of the Premier League. Perennial winners Manchester United were joined by Chelsea, Arsenal and Liverpool, who constantly hogged the top 4 positions in the Premier League in the 2000s. This only increased the financial disparity between the top 4 and the other clubs of the Premier League. 2008 brought another big change into the Premier League when Abu Dhabi United Group acquired Manchester City. Not unlike Chelsea, Manchester City owners had deep pockets and were able to invest huge amounts of money to make Manchester City competitive in the Premier League. The power balance was shifting again. This brings us to the famous 2011-12 Premier League season. It had been 3 years since the Manchester City takeover. Millions of pounds had already been poured into making the team stronger. Big transfer fees had been paid to bring in players like Robinho, Yaya Toure, David Silva, Edin Dzeko, Samir Nasri, Carlos Tevez, etc. over these 3 seasons. The results, too, were improving but were yet to match the level of investment. From 10th in the takeover season to 5th in 2009-10 to 3rd in 2010-11, they were constantly moving up the table. The 2010-11 season also saw them winning the FA Cup, ending a 35-year-old silverware drought. But the investment wasn't going to stop. The summer of 2011 saw them bring in their most expensive player yet, Sergio Aguero. At the time, nobody knew that the former Independiente and Atletico Madrid player was going to be key to what was going to be the most unprecedented Premier League title race ever. Manchester City had a fantastic beginning to the season, winning 11 of their first 13 games. That included an emphatic 6-1 win over Manchester United away at the Old Trafford, and they raced to the number 1 spot on the Premier League table. Despite the harrowing defeat to the City rivals, Manchester United kept it close for most of the season. It was already apparent that this season it was a 2-horse race. However, March proved to be a particularly difficult month for City. In a run of 5 games from 11th March to 8th April 2012, Manchester City won only 1 game, drawing 2 and losing 2. This allowed Manchester United to take a sizable lead over Manchester City. After game week 32, Manchester United had an 8-point lead over Manchester City. It seemed United were on their way to a 13th Premier League title, while City will have to make do with a runners-up medal. But as luck would have it, Manchester United had their own slump in form. From the next 5 games, Manchester United managed to win only 2, losing 2 and drawing 1. The defeats included a loss to Manchester City at the Etihad, meaning Manchester City had done the double over Manchester United. Manchester City, on the other hand, went on a winning run. It is funny, isn't it? In 2009, when asked if Manchester City would ever walk into a Manchester derby as the favourites, Ferguson had answered, "Not in my lifetime." But here we were, 37 games in. Manchester City had not only done the double over Manchester United, but were also leading the table on goal differential. Sunday, 13th May 2012. The league hung in the balance as both teams went into the final day on equal points. Manchester City needed just a win. Manchester United not only needed to win, but also needed City to drop points. Recent form was in City's favour. Would the power balance finally shift? Manchester City had started the game strongly. Sami Nasri missed an early chance, while David Silva shot one straight into the QPR goalkeeper's hands. In the 39th minute, Pablo Zabaleta finally broke the deadlock. At halftime, Manchester City led 1-0. Their one hand was on the trophy. But this was not only about Manchester City. At halftime, Bolton were winning 2-1 against Stoke, which meant QPR were on the verge of being relegated. At the Stadium of Light, Manchester United had taken the lead through Wayne Rooney in the 20th minute, but at the halfway point, it wasn't going to be enough. The second half started in a blitz. 3 minutes into the second half, QPR equalized due to a howler from Julian Lescott. 7 minutes later, Joey Barton was dismissed by the ref for elbowing Tevez. After being shown the red card, ugly scenes ensued as Barton got into a scuffle with City players, notably Aguero and company, and was needed to be escorted. This did not stop QPR from netting a second in the 66th minute when Jamie Mackey scored through a header. City was suddenly 2-1 down at home to relegation candidates QPR. City had long been known as a team that took a step forward only to take 2 steps back. For a long time, City was everyone's second favorite team because of their penchant for failing. However, few could have seen this moment coming except the long-suffering Manchester City fans. The term Cityitis was coined for this very reason. As the clock ticked away to 90, City launched wave after wave of attacks, but in vain. In the 77th minute, Stoke City had equalized in their game, which meant QPR was all but safe. The minutes ticked down. The expressions of frustration were written all over the City fans. City still needed to score at least twice to win the Premier League in the 5 minutes of injury time allotted. In the 2nd minute of the injury time, Dzeko scored, equalizing the scores. But it wasn't going to be enough. They needed one more. Just one more. From the kickoff, the ball was launched long into City's half for a throw-in. They launched another attack, but QPR cleared. Meanwhile, Manchester United had finished a clinical win at Sunderland, and now they waited. QPR too was safe as Bolton vs Stoke City ended 2-2, but they didn't know it. Aguero had dropped deep, carrying the ball forward and then passed the ball to Balotelli. Balotelli fell under a challenge and while being prone on the ground, somehow managed to pass the ball to Aguero with his outstretched leg. Aguero skipped past an oncoming challenge and then
Balotelli, Aguero!
Manchester City had done it. The scenes at the Etihad were euphoric. Manchester City had finally won their first league title since 1967-68 season, a wait of 44 years. The final whistle saw City fans invade the pitch. Among them was an 11-year-old Phil Foden. The goal had just changed the destiny of Manchester, Premier League and football. It is said winning is a habit, and after this, Manchester City caught that habit. Since that day, Manchester City has won the league 6 more times, 2 more FA Cups, 6 more EFL Cups, and eventually their maiden UEFA Champions League. Not only that, they went on to complete a historic treble in the 22-23 season. While Manchester City rose to new heights, Manchester United declined. They won the 2012-13 Premier League title, but since then they have won no league titles. They did win a few trophies here and there like the Europa League and the League Cup under Mourinho, an FA Cup under Van Gaal and another League Cup under Erik ten Hag. But these successes cannot hide the definite decline and the rot that had set in. The top 4 had been converted into top 6, with Manchester City now at the top and Tottenham joining in. Many more clubs got bought out, the most significant being Newcastle being bought by the Saudi-backed PIF. The rise of Chelsea and more importantly City indicated a true power shift in the world of football, and that meant new financial fair play rules were put into place. Whether they were there for sustenance of clubs or if they were there to curb the rise of nouveau-rich clubs is a discussion for another time. With the rise of these clubs, Premier League became more lucrative than ever before, shifting the power balance in Europe. And a lot of these developments can be tracked back to that Aguero goal. Today, Manchester City sit at the top of the mountain, albeit under the cloud of serious charges of financial rules breaches, but that's a topic for another day. It has to be said that on 13th May 2012, football truly changed. Thank you for watching. Like if you liked it, share if you find it worthy, and subscribe. This is Salty Football.